said, my name is I am the relationship manager, one of two relationship managers at Manawinui, primarily focusing on the relationship between the NASC, so Needs Assessment Coordinators, for example, Taikura in Auckland, Taikura Trust, and the relationship between them and us as a host provider. I came on board late last year, around November, from a DHB public healthcare background. From a personal perspective, I was born with cerebral palsy, so I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and I have care support throughout the week to help me to be able to achieve what I need to achieve on a day-to-day basis. So being able to be part of an organization like Manawinui and speak to people about their care journey and where they're at and how we can help is pretty cool, really. Most days it doesn't really feel like a job, it just feels like you're helping people, which is quite cool. So I'll hand over to Simon and he can introduce himself.
Kia ora, ngā mihi Liam. Kia ora koutou, ko Simon Anderson ngā hau, ko Te Apauri, raua ko ngā takoto, ngā iwi, no shore ahau, nai e mahi ana ahau ki Manawinui. So kia ora everybody, my name is Simon. I had some whakapapa through iwi in the far north. I live in the North Shore of Auckland and am currently working for Manawinui as the Marketing and Communications Manager. So that makes me fortunate enough to do events like these as part of my role, alongside managing all of our social media, websites, communications, and all sorts of other bits and pieces like our collateral and all sorts of other resources we create. So that's my responsibility, and I'm very grateful to be alongside my colleague Liam to talk to you today about individualized funding, Manawinui, and on a more broad term, we're going to make sure we are all familiar with the term self-direction and self-directed funding and what that means for disabled people in New Zealand. So I do have a slight presentation that we can run through, but just so that we leave enough time at the end, I will probably skip through a couple of slides that may not be too relevant with the time we have. So we like to start all of these presentations with a whakatauki, just to set the scene. So tonight it is whaia te māturanga, hei oronga mō koutou, which means seek after learning for the sake of your well-being. And I think that fits in quite nicely with the theme of the webinars and this year for MS Auckland, which is connecting today and preparing for tomorrow, or envisioning tomorrow. I think individualized funding is a perfect way to start off that series because it's definitely about connecting you to the community today, but also the future of individualized funding is a really exciting thing to watch. So we can talk a little bit about that as well. So first off, some formalities. Manawinui is the pioneer and leading facilitator of self-directed funding in New Zealand. At Manawinui, we believe that self-direction is a human moral right, and we're driven by this belief and our four core values, which are: we make it easy, people are really important to us, we deliver delight, and we challenge ourselves to go beyond. The reason we call out our values up front is that we encourage our customers to use them to hold us accountable. So if they believe that our services aren't quite making it easy, or they don't feel important, we encourage them to use that in their communications with us so that they can get the service out of us that they need. So what is the leading facilitator of self-directed funding mean? Self-directed funding is an umbrella term that we've created because there is no longer just individualized funding. There are a few other streams that are available that have the same core principles at heart, which means the disabled person directs their funding themselves, their funding and their supports themselves. So the decision-making, the control, the accountability, the responsibility, it all lies as close to the disabled person as possible for their situation. So if for example, the disabled person may not be in a position to manage their own funding, they can appoint somebody else close to them that they trust, and it is their responsibility to act on behalf of the disabled person, is what we call an agent. So really quickly, self-directed funding means any funding where the decision making and control and all of the transparency happens right in the center at the family level, at the individual level as well. And so, yes, this is our agenda. We will just skip through a few, but just so you know, we will talk a little bit about disability funding and the landscape, what actually is individualized funding, a little bit about purchasing guidelines, and we'll probably stop there to save time for questions. But yeah, if you feel like you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat and we can cover it either as we go, or we'll wait till the end. I'm sure while I'm presenting, Liam will probably have a couple time, spare bit of time to respond to comments if he needs to.
Yep, for sure. Yep.
Cool. Okay, so this little funky diagram should hopefully clear things up pretty quickly. So individualized funding in some shape or form, or self-directed funding, is available through these different avenues. So at the center of this diagram at the bottom is the most restrictive and least flexible option for individualized funding. It is through the DHBs, and it is what you would consider traditional individualized funding, if that makes sense. It is what the first iteration was like before some of these recent changes, which we'll go over, came into play. So if you are funded through the DHB, most of the time that's for our elderly customers, sorry, or people with medical conditions. Their individualized funding can only cover the costs of support performed by an individual. So whether that's the cost of your own employees or the cost of a care agency, you can only use your DHB funding to pay for hours of support and associated costs of running that business. We can get into that a bit later. When you step up a level, you enter the world of individualized funding. This is available across the whole country. And you'll see in the brackets, I've put two acronyms. Now, I'll try to dispel the acronyms as I go because I despise them. Personal care is PC is personal care. Very quick and easy. It's keeping you safe and healthy, showering, toileting, the basic needs to keep you running day to day. Household management, another one that's descriptive on the tin. It's the needs you have to keep your house running in order. Do you have the ability to run a vacuum around the house? Can you reach all of the top cabinets in your place to keep them tidy? So those are the sort of things that build up a picture of what sort of household management support you may need. So the reason they're together is that once you are assessed and allocated individualized funding, you are assessed based on two streams of funding. So you get a bucket of hours for personal care and a bucket of hours for your household management. But when you have individualized funding, it just becomes one big pool. So it doesn't matter anymore. But just so you're aware, your individualized funding is made up of those two elements, your personal care and your household management. The step up again, we have respite and carers support subsidy. So that is what CSS stands for. Respite and carer support is all about providing the main carer a break. When we're talking with our customers about whether they're spending their respite funding appropriately, we ask them two simple questions. Is the disabled person supported? And is the main carer getting a break? Whatever that looks like for your family situation is totally up to you. And as long as you can answer those questions honestly and meet those criteria, then respite funding is great. Common examples I use a lot is things like riding for the disabled or swimming lessons. If you're the mum or dad or whoever it might be, the main carer, if you're sitting on the bleachers in the leisure centre while the person supported is having swimming lessons, well, they're fully supported by the lifeguard in the pool, and unless they need additional support, which is totally fine and easy to be funded. And you are sitting on the sideline reading a book, you're not actively engaged in supervision, whatever that might look like for your family, and have what activities you fund. Oh, sorry. Whatever activities you fund is totally up to you. So if you haven't heard of carer support is a subsidy where you allocate a number of days and you put in claims for a number of those days or all of them, and you are paid a cash subsidy that you can then pass on to whoever needs it, whether it be a company or one of your mates or family. Respite does the same thing, but it's in dollar terms, just like normal individualized funding, and we'll cover that in a second. EIF is enhanced individualized funding. That is a pilot that started in the Bay of Plenty, closing in on a decade ago, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago. This started in the Bay of Plenty, and that is where we get our purchasing guidelines from, if you've heard of that any time recently. Excuse me. The next one up is EGL Christchurch, and that's a pilot in the Christchurch area with a small group. And as you go up, these pilots become much more flexible. The assessment process changes. There's a few different processes along with different rules governing the funding, and it allows it for a much more flexible use of the funding than individualized funding. But considering this is MS Auckland, a lot of you will be looking at individualized funding and the respite options.
You okay, Simon? Do you want me to take over for a minute, or
I'm good, thank you. Okay, so what is self-directed funding? It means that you are in control of how, when, and who delivers your support at home and in the community. This means you purchase and choose the support you need, employ the people you want, and manage your available budget. We're here whenever you need and can provide as much support as you'd like to ensure you can manage your own funding easily. Whether you're looking for assistance with recruitment, budgeting, or just being an employer and need a payroll system, we have the option to suit you. So self-directed funding and individualized funding is essentially taking the same support and funding that is made available to traditional support services and giving you full control over that that funding. Just to make it explicitly clear, when you are assessed, those two streams I was talking about, personal care and household management, you get a number of hours per week. So say, for example, 5 hours of PC, 5 hours of HM a week, gives you 10 hours of support a week. In the traditional model, you would take that 10 hours, turn up to an agency or a service provider and say, I have 10 hours a week. Let's see if we can make a schedule that works for your staff and my life so that I can get supported by you. What happens with individualized funding is every hour that you are allocated is worth a dollar amount. Within individualized funding, that dollar amount is $34.74. So for example, if we had those 10 hours a week, you would times those 10 hours by $34.74. That would give you your weekly funding amount. You would then times your weekly funding amount by 52 to get you the full year's funding. So individualized funding is a 12-month period managing a dollar amount of an actual budget of money so that you can ensure either your supports or the disabled person you are supporting, make sure their supports are completed, they are happy, healthy, and safe, and that you make sure you don't exhaust the funding too soon or you don't use it at all. So that is individualized funding 101. It is you as the person with the disability or the person with the funding or the agent they've chosen. You are basically setting up yourself as a small business, and the mission statement or the aim of this business is to say this disabled person is going to be fully supported, happy, healthy, and achieve everything that's in their goals. And I will use this funding available to me over the 12 months to ensure that happens, whether that be employing support staff and paying wages, or putting in expense claims for services used or items purchased. That is totally up to you. As long as it's within the guidelines of the funding, it's pretty much up to you to decide how that works. So who can we help? The great thing about self-direction is that funding can be used in a way that works best for any individual and their whānau. What I was saying before, it's individualized funding, so it works for your individual situation. And we're always looking for new groups and communities that we can help support through self-directed funding. Excuse me. I don't believe this is all of them, but this is largely 99% of our current customer base, with the first one being the overall majority by a long shot. So that is people with a long-term disability under the age of 65. Those people are assessed and funded by the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health doesn't actually assess those people. If you haven't heard of it, there is an organization called a NASC, N-A-S-C, stands for Needs Assessment and Service Coordination. They assess your needs and coordinate your services, just on the tin as well. So their responsibility is to manage everybody in their region on behalf of the Ministry of Health, and to say, these are the disabled people in this region, this is how much funding they have available, and this is the service that they use. So the NASC assess you, and the one in Auckland, if you haven't heard of it, is called Taikura Trust. If you need help working with that NASC, my colleague Liam, and then also a couple of my other colleagues are there and waiting to help you if you've got any sort of slow processing or you've never been to Taikura. Then we also have people who are over 65 with an age-related disability through the DHBs. There is a litmus test when you turn 65, and that is, what is the primary disability? If your primary disability is still the one you've had since birth or acquired through your life, then you can stay with the Ministry of Health funding. If you develop, say, Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and that becomes your primary disability and it's age-related, then you can transfer over to the DHB to receive IF through them. But it's not that you have to, it's just that is the standard procedure. And then also we have chronic long-term conditions, which is mostly the medically fragile children who are in and out of hospital and need that medical level care at home. Those with vocational funding through MSD, which is quite a high level of impairment you need to meet before you can have IF through that funding, but it is possible. And then if it was a result of an accident, it's also possible, but challenging just through the way ACC allocate funding and manage it. It's quite different to the Ministry of Health. And then we also have some people with a disability and a mental illness, and anybody who wants to fund their support privately or through the community, they are also able to have their funding hosted with us. And the most important part of this whole slide is that none of this is means tested. It means that it doesn't matter how much you earn or don't earn, your funding is completely separate to that. It is not tested against any other factors in your life. So how does it actually work? How do you go about doing it? So the first step that I guess is missing from this process is the disabled person gets diagnosed. And then the next step is that the person turns up at the NASC and gets himself assessed based on their disability. The NASC or the funder, if it's not the NASC, would allocate that funding to the person. So that's what I was talking about. They'd allocate you 5 hours of PC and 5 hours of household management. Then it is up to the person to decide who is going to help them manage that funding. So at that point, they can choose to go down the traditional services route and hand over their funding to a provider. Or there are a couple of individualized funding hosts you can choose from. So we aren't the only one as well. And yeah, we encourage you to look into their services as well. There may be some parts of their services that make them more ideal than ours. So hopefully the person then decides that they want to be a Manawanui customer. And so the NASC would let us know, say, hey there, Joe Bloggs is coming over to your services and here's how much funding they have. So then we get in contact with you. We have a couple of forms and a bit of a setup process that you need to go through. We call that onboarding. You get allocated a coach who is there to stand alongside you, help explain things as you go. And then once you're set up, it is your responsibility to either employ the staff that you want to use or find the contractors or the agencies that are going to support the disabled person. And then the services provided. So whether it's your employees or agencies provide care or support, then the agent or the disabled person sends in the timesheets or expense claims to us. And we then process your timesheets. We do all of the background admin. We make it as easy as possible. And then so what happens actually is once you submit your cost to us, whether those be wages or claims, we pay that out ourselves out of our own fund, out of our own money. We pay your staff up front, we reimburse you up front, and then after that's all done, we go back to the ministry and we say, hi there, ministry, here's all the customers that we have that you have funding allocations for, and this is how much each of them has spent. So we don't hold on to your funding at all. The Ministry of Health holds on to it somewhere in their big world, and we just know how much you have available and draw down on it as you use it. So in bold at the bottom, super important. I think I've said it a couple of times already. The person is the decision maker around how, when, and who delivers supports, as long as this is within the guidelines. But it is the key tenet to individualized funding. If the person in the middle is not making the decisions, is not being listened to or heard in the decision-making process, it's not individualized funding. Okay, so what exactly is our role as Manawanui? So like I said before, we perform some coaching because I will be honest, there is a learning curve that you do need to go through with individualized funding if you've not heard of it before, but we do our best to make it as easy as possible, get you set up as quickly as possible and self-sufficient at as quick as possible at your pace, right? So we're never pressuring you into being a self-serving customer, but the aim of individualized funding and our aim is to get you as competent and capable in managing your own funding as possible, because we don't want you to have to keep interrupting your lives to come and ask us for help. So we also do budgeting and employment advice and support. All of that is run through our online portal, for our customer web portal. So it has everything from your bank statement, for lack of a better word, your funding statement. It has budgeting, it has all of your employment details, and it does all of your expenses and timesheets as well. So it's a one-stop shop and makes everything easy. Then of course, just some sort of contractual obligations as well. We need to make sure that you are aware of your ongoing funding balance, and then as well as the person who funded you needs to know how much funding you have. And so that is the reporting as well that we have. Essentially, our responsibility and the role of Manawanui is to ensure you understand individualized funding and you understand our tools and applications that you use to manage your individualized funding. And that you have a great understanding of how IF works for you in your individual circumstance. Because we can't tell you what support works. We can tell you what others have had success with, but unless we understand your situation as well as you, we won't know what's going to work in terms of the support setup. But we can obviously help. Okay, so I do believe Rachel is in this meeting, and so I hope I have the abilities to turn it into may I please have some help from MSAKR to give, sorry, Nicola, can you please get Moments with Love, the name and the participants as a panelist? That is our...
Oh, Simon, yes, I have promoted Rachel to panelist, hopefully.
There you go, perfect. And all right, if you are there, Rachel, we'd love to see your face and have you unmuted. Hello, Rachel, are you there?
I think she might have dropped out.
I have a number. If Liam takes any questions, maybe while we oh, I'll tell you what. If we continue and see if she comes back, we'll just continue with the content that we are running out of time. Well, we are quite close actually.
We can circle back, eh?
Yeah, okay, so I just want to make the most of the time we have. Nicola, sorry, you don't need to come back on screen, but how much time do we have, I guess, for this presentation before we start taking questions?
Probably another 20 minutes, maybe, isn't it?
Yeah, about another 15, 20
Okay.
minutes. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, we should have plenty. So we will come back to Rachel once I can get in contact with her, and let's move on to, just as interesting, the purchasing guidelines. So if you haven't heard of these, the purchasing guidelines are 4 criteria introduced to individualized funding, carer support, and some of the pilots that I talked about earlier. And the purpose of the guidelines is to give people a framework to apply their own unique circumstances and ensure that they can use their funding appropriately to purchase disability supports as items. So here's a bit of a history. Like I said, they started out in the Bay of Plenty as part of the trial called Enhanced IF, and the enhancement of IF was these guidelines. And so this was fantastic for people in the Bay of Plenty. They were purchasing all sorts of unique items as disability supports until the ministry started putting their fine-tooth comb over the pilot, and they put a few extra criteria and rules around purchases, and the flexibility that was the benefit of this pilot was largely removed, and it became a lot more cumbersome, and there was a lot more litigation between host and our customers. So it, when I say litigation, I mean discussing of purchases and whether they fit the criteria. So what happened is that over the years, the other Enabling Good Lives pilots were set up. So in Waikato and Canterbury, they used the same guidelines. And there was a bit of an undercurrent of inequity developing. People were starting to get clued up on the pilots. People were starting to learn a lot about enabling good lives and peeping over the boundary to see that actually in other areas, or people across the street in some situations had a far greater deal of flexibility. And so that started kind of making waves, but nothing was really happening until we had our first lockdowns. So what happened is we all went into level 4, and basically all day services, respite services, you name it, closed down and people were sent home. There were stories of people getting packed up out of living arrangements and getting dropped off at the nearest family member's house without any sort of warning. Some of the stories were just harrowing. And so what they did is the Ministry of Health temporarily enabled the purchasing guidelines for IF and carer support. So to replace the services that are out there, they said, okay, use your funding to purchase whatever items allow you to keep your bubble safe, stay home, and fit within the guidelines. So as long as it was disability related, it was and it met the other criteria, people were able to purchase things with their funding for the first time. So what they did is they said, okay, we know that this is going to be for the next 3 months. They said you can purchase items with your funding. And so what happened is that every time we got close to the end of that 3 months, people would just slam their funding full of expenses because they were concerned that they'd never be able to do this again. And if you can imagine the sort of freedom of being able to purchase items and then it just getting taken away randomly one day when they say, oh, COVID's not a problem anymore. A lot of people didn't like that. And so what happened is that extension happened 3 times before they made it permanent. So same process happened. And finally, it is a permanent fixture for all DSS funding. So that's from carer support through individualized funding, all the way up through the pilots. And so let's take a look at the purchasing guidelines that we have today.
Simon, just quickly, yes. I think Rachel might have ironed out the teething technical issues.
Okay, alrighty. Well, I don't want to keep Rachel waiting around. Are you there, Rachel? Hello. I can see she's unmuted, but there's no sound coming. I'll just continue until she speaks up. All right. So the first purchasing guideline. It helps people live their life or makes their life better. Oh, I heard a cough. Is that you, Rachel? Hello.
apologies, Simon. It is me. We've just figured out the tech. My apologies for interrupting you.
No, that's fine. We will go back to you because I don't want you need to sit around longer than you need to if you've got other stuff you need to get to. Actually, I will just stop sharing so that we can look at you and us. Alrighty. So to everybody, this is Rachel Peterson. She's one of our Manawanui customers. She's actually been on IF for a very long time and so has quite a lot of experience. She has just recently started, in the last years or so, she started a business with her daughter called Moments with Love, and they do gift boxes for corporates and the community with a huge focus on profiling disability-focused businesses or just unique Kiwi-owned sustainable businesses. So if you're looking for the next present for your mother or daughter or brother or sister or anything, or your corporate gift boxes, consider Moments with Love because you're directly giving back to the disability community. And with that introduction, Rachel, I'll hand it over to you just to give us a little bit of an insight into your life with IF, please.
Hey, Simon, that shout out was above and beyond. We appreciate that. I've been with Manawanui over 10 years, a very long history with them. We worked out of the same building. My mum was involved with the startup. She actually tried to convince me for a while to come on IF, to be honest. But I experienced dyslexia as well as being a wheelchair user with muscular dystrophy. So my hesitation was, well, I can't raise 2 kids and have the stress of days and times and pay sheets and staff. And to be honest, it's really easy these days. The porthole helped me a lot. So the porthole is something where you can log in and electronically let Manawanui know what staff did what on what day. They send you bar graphs and charts and ways that you can see how you're tracking with your funding. It's super, super easy. And from someone that experiences dyslexia, I can run with it and I can really see where I'm tracking and how I'm going and keep myself on track. But for real, I'm not being paid to be here. I am a staunch advocate for individualized funding. Previously to Moments with Love, I worked with disabled parents for 3 years, had a project with Yes Disability, and the flexibility that it brings for parents is probably my biggest passion outside the old gift box thing that I do for a living these days. But having people in your home that you can trust, having people that can be flexible on any given day, could be a conference in Wellington, or it could be a big event that I'm going to that I was invited to, or it could be a really bad day that I'm working from my bed and unable to self-transfer and make soup. And the sort of affordability that you have with finding good, reliable people and being able to budget your time spend and your energy spend at any certain time for what you need, because every week's not the same in any of our lives, regardless of we've got an impairment or not. Some weeks we're all crack-a-lacking and things are golden, and other weeks our energy is down, our soul's down, or our finances are down. And in a modern world, we need that flexibility to meet our needs. And it's a two-way street as well. I also care a lot and am very connected to lots of people who work in the sector as PAs or support people. And I've always not enjoyed the model that, choosing my words, big agencies sometimes charge a lot of money back to the NASCs and DHBs for funding and then give low-level support and low-level wages to people doing the really hard mahi at the ground end and take a cut every hour for that. And I have never enjoyed that. I never think it's an equitable or ethical model. I would prefer to find really good people that want to work in the sector and then protect them, provide for them, and enhance their learning so that they stay with you for many years. So I think Manawanui's played a leadership role in enabling both care and support staff and clients to have that flexibility. And I just think it's a shining example that it works.
Thank you very much, Rachel. If anybody has any questions now for Rachel, I'm not quite sure how long she has, so if you pop them in the chat, then we can address Rachel herself. But for me, I was just wondering, with the transition to this post-COVID or not, the COVID is out there now, and it's a massive factor in your resource planning. So how has your use of IF changed, and how, I guess, has IF been able to keep you adapting through this COVID?
Yeah. I actually enjoyed fantastic support from a team of a couple of people that I had for between 6 and 8 years, and that was absolutely fantastic. And then during recent changes in my lifestyle and recent changes in COVID, we've really tried something new that I was scared to try, but we are doing a family dynamic at the moment that I'm having support from family. It does have its unique challenges with boundaries and expectations, and I always want to be real about that. It's not all rainbows and unicorns, but we didn't want to have too many strangers coming and going from our house at the moment. But my care is still my care, the washing's still the washing, the dishes are still the dishes. Like, regardless of any of our physical capabilities, we all want the same thing: a safe, warm home, healthy kai on the table, and only people that we love and respect in our home. And being able to transfer over from external support and putting ads on Seek or using family and friend resources over to using internal resources, because we felt safer doing that, was just an added benefit. And to be honest, Simon, I don't think we'll do it forever, because I've got strong-minded family, and my daughter's 21 and she's an incredibly strong-minded woman, and we both have different opinions and lenses on the world, and she needs to do her thing and I need to do mine. But at the moment, we need to restrict the humans coming and going from our house, and having that flexibility that this is working for us right now, this is working for me right now, and when I see fit and when I feel safer having other people come into our home, we'll do that again. But I think the COVID environment's just shown another reason why this can be really beneficial to people.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I appreciate that. And just to build on what she's saying, so officially the ministry have removed the need for the SPA level to be high or very high on the service authorization before you can pay your own family. So up until the end of this month, and we've had no indication it'll go further, but if it's just like the purchasing guidelines we were talking about, I'm sure they'll extend it again until it becomes permanent. And that basically means if you've got IF or respite and you need to use your family to support you, there's no requirements other than you need them to support you and you have the funding available. So that's really awesome, and hopefully that stays.
Simon, just the acronym SPA level, like I haven't had a SPA for a while. What does that mean?
It's, what is it, like, I think it's just something like service specification. It's a really stupid acronym, but it's,
like that.
It's basically just a calculation from the assessment process based on the information you give them that puts you in a band of need level. So there's low needs, mid needs, and then there's high and very high. And so before the change, you had to have high or very high needs to pay family, which was pretty much everyone that we supported anyway, but some people were missing out. But now nobody needs to. So it's far more equitable. And I'm not sure if the ministry saw the news article, what was it, maybe like 6 months to a year ago, where some reporter bailed up Andrew Little on the street about this specific issue about the SPA level. So maybe they're listening and changing, and hopefully it's a permanent change.
On another chat, I won't hijack your boys' meeting tonight, but on another chat, it would be really interesting to see if anyone's doing research about the outcomes of this and reducing falls and reducing mental health crisis and reducing these things. It would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to see some research about how we know this is working from this that work in it and live in it, but wouldn't it be awesome to see the business case for that?
Well, we have something like that, which we did. So there is a company called Impact Labs, which is owned by one of our board members, and their whole business, Impact Labs, is they do research and analyze companies and give them a social impact rating, how much extra positive indicators of society are increased for every unit of effort this organization puts in. So there is actually a report that is on our website if you're looking for it, And it basically talks about the impact of individualized funding and the reduction in domestic violence, mental health, all of that. Yeah, it's all articulated, and it shows you just how much impact is created. And it's all about the earlier you start in someone's life, the exponential amount of social impact in their life that happens from being with IF. So yeah, there is more and more research coming out, and we've commissioned a couple of pieces. So
I will definitely geek out and have a look at that, because
Totally.
that sounds fascinating. Thank you.
Just on one of the questions, so Jane said, are you able to fund outside PC and home help, i.e. physiotherapist or occupational therapist or speech language therapist? So this basically segues into our purchasing discussion nicely, which we'll start back up soon. But essentially, those are all services that the DHB normally funds, especially things like physical therapy and speech language therapy, things like that. So there is a bit of additional complexity, and it basically we basically require you to just show evidence that you've exhausted the usual avenues to get your therapies funded. And once you can show to us, hey, I've gone to the DHB, the wait list is 3 years long, or actually they won't fund me, what can I do? Then you can come to us and we can talk about how your individualized funding can cover those costs. The other alternative is put an ad on student job search, go to the local nursing school and ask them, say, hey, is there anybody out there who wants to put their stuff to the test while providing support for somebody? Because you can't pay for specific speech language therapy, but there's nothing wrong with hiring a speech language therapy student as a support person, and they practice while they're on the job. The same thing for any other sort of therapy. The other thing you can do is you can actually pay for a therapist to train your staff. So if you have some specific exercises that help your mobility and reduce pain and that sort of thing, instead of going to the physiotherapist, you can pay for their time to train your staff so that they can perform those sort of supports for you.
Just to back up what you're saying there, Simon, in the second lockdown, we actually did that. My long-term support worker knew me really well, but she felt uncomfortable performing stretches or helping me do my stuff because she was scared she was going to hurt me. So we got a really high quality guy who was clearly trained and resourced and qualified, and he'd jump on Zoom and he would direct my support worker exactly what was safe, so that I wasn't putting her in an unsafe position and my body was safe. So that really worked for us, getting someone externally to do the training. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Well, if anybody has any questions for Rachel, I'm sure she's happy to answer them. And if any come through from the recording, I'm sure Nicola or Luminita will put those questions through to us and I'll get in touch with Rachel. And the same if you've got questions for us as well. But I will just say one last thank you to Rachel for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on board.
Thank you, Rachel.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I still, my core interest is still parents, and I still think that it's hard enough being a person with an impairment, but when you put kids into the mix as well, I really firmly believe that parents should be able to have absolute choice who's influencing their children, who's up in their home. So that's really where my ethos comes from, and I'll do anything to support what you guys are up to at all times. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the mahi that you guys continue to do. Sincerely believe in it, and I'm more than happy, Simon, for you to shoot me through any questions. I can stay on for the next 5 minutes happily, just in case things come to people's mind. Okay.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yes, of course, Rachel. Thank you. Yeah, just hang tight. I will share my screen and we will go back into the presentation. So I will just skip back to where we were. Come on, if this works. Go. Okay, so purchasing guidelines. All 4 of the criteria need to be satisfied in each purchase or item you're looking to purchase. Otherwise, it can't be covered with your funding. So the first one is super easy and really easy for you to explain to us as well. Sometimes it's self-explanatory. but it helps people live their life or makes their life better. So is this going to improve your life? Is it going to enrich your life? Is it going to improve the efficiencies in parts of your life, whether it be your routines or your work, whatever it may be? Does it make your life easier or better? The second one works in tandem with the first, of course. It is a disability support. So not only does it improve your life, because I know that a fancy flash car will improve my life, but it's not quite a disability support. So as long as you can articulate, if it's not exceedingly obvious, that it is a disability support. So it can be any sort of item. We use the term ordinary cost or an ordinary household item. Even those can be considered disability supports, but there is a little bit of an extra step involved. We'll get to that. The third point is that it is reasonable and cost effective. Super simple. We're not going to approve the fanciest, flashiest luxury model on the market, but if it's about market price, or let's say it's a little bit more expensive than the average model, but it's going to last a far long time into the future, or it's going to reduce your support needs or the cost of your support needs over time, so you can show that that's going to be cost effective. And then the fourth one is not subject to a limit or exclusion. So that means, is it funded elsewhere? Is it illegal? If it's one of those two things, it normally won't be funded. The illegal stuff, never funded, but the funded elsewhere, that's what I was talking about with therapies and things like that. You just need to show us that you've tried and they've said no, or that the impact on you is unreasonable. So the first one, it helps people live their life. The support should help people live a good life. Super easy. Each person has a different idea of what a good life is. We tell people who have not yet been assessed by the NASC, put some goals in your plan, or make sure that the NASC write down some of your goals. And it can be really broad things like having good relationships, maintaining or improving skills, whatever that might be, being able to participate at home or in the community. It could be learning to drive, it could be studying at university, it could be flatting, it could be getting a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it might be. Those are your goals, and your funding is there to help you achieve those goals. And the other thing I'll say is that if you don't have any goals in your plan, it's not like you can't purchase anything. It just helps, right? This is just a bit of extra help that you've thought about it, you've planned it, and it's not just something that you've decided you wanted on a whim, that you've actually planned, and there is some evidence behind this as being a good idea. But of course, if your goals change at any time, that's totally fine. You don't need to have them updated. You can just say that this is going to make my life better, and here's how. 2, it is a disability support. Super easy to justify this one. It is a disability support if it is only needed because the person is disabled, or it costs more than would be the case if the person wasn't disabled, or it is in addition to or complements goods or services that the person would need if they didn't experience a disability. So is it directly related to supporting a disability? Super easy. Is it an ordinary item that would cost more because you have a disability? And is it something that you need to buy on top of an ordinary good because of your disability? So some people get modifications to a bike or things like that you only need because of a disability, so you can get that sort of thing funded. 3, it is reasonable and cost effective. So generally it should be reasonable. It should cost about the same or less than the market price for comparable things. Cost effective means that it's the best available outcome for the money spent. Like I said before, it might cost more than another type of support, but it will help the person more, so it'll give you a better outcome. It will last longer, or mean that there's less spent on the future supports. So my favorite example for this criteria is an infrared nightlight. There is a family with an autistic daughter. They were paying for somebody to stay up every night and support their daughter to resettle her, keep her safe if she couldn't go back to bed, and essentially just be there in case anything happened, so that mum and dad could sleep through the night. They did some research and found out that other people had success with an infrared nightlight because it helps the body produce melatonin, and autistic people naturally have lower levels of melatonin and don't produce it as easily. So they put the claim through, it was approved. It was an $80 nightlight. They put it in their daughter's room and she sleeps through the night unaided, no support needed. So what is more cost effective than an $80 nightlight? That's a one-off expense, or the continual cost of paying somebody to stay up in your home so that they can keep your daughter safe. You know, so it's also that nightlight is more cost effective, but it is also, it's going to create a better outcome as well, because the daughter is sleeping and not just being minded when she's not sleeping. So that's the sort of justification that we're looking for. It doesn't need to be that compelling, obviously, but that's just an easy example. So this is one we were talking about earlier. It is not subject to a limit or exclusion. So you should explore other funding options to help get the support. So examples, but this is not all of them. Places like work and income, grants and charitable donations through other services and organizations, equipment funding, either through the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health, because they do have specific funding for equipment. And I'll get to your question from the beginning. I think it was Joe. The specialist services, so that's things like Ministry of Health and DHBs that fund therapies and special services, and then also transport allowances. So what we like to say is that in some cases, people can buy support when funding for that support has been turned down by or on the behalf of the responsible government agency, or if waiting times are too long and the proposed support is expected to achieve a person's life goal that would not otherwise be achievable, reduce disability support costs over time, and reduce the risk that disability support costs will increase in the future. So if they've said no or they've said yes, but you need to wait, if that wait is unreasonable and you believe that acting as soon as possible and using individualized funding is going to create a much better outcome than if they were to wait to get it funded properly, then that is sufficient. So we can, as long as it satisfies the other criteria, if you've proven to us that you've tried, you've gone out there and they've all said no, and it's really unreasonable for the ones that said yes, then you can come back with that evidence, and as long as you satisfy the other criteria, then that purchase will go through. So here's a couple of examples. Easy one, adaptive bikes. You can see them in the top left corner. Adaptive bike is super simple. It's been adapted just to specific disability needs, and so whatever it might be on their goals, it could be related to improving their muscle tone, it could be improving their cardio, it could just be about getting out in the house and they just want a bike to get them around the community. That's going to improve their life. It's a disability support. Well, they're probably not going to get an adaptive bike if they don't need to. So it's easy for that second one. Is it reasonable and cost effective? Well, as long as you're not buying like a fancy top of the range gold plated e-bike that you don't need. I mean, maybe you do need that, and that's a different, but as long as it's within reason and it's cost effective, and that the bike's going to last a long time, it's going to give you enjoyment and health benefits for years into the future, it's quite a reasonable and cost effective use of your funding. And nobody else funds these sort of bikes, so your IF is able to come to the party here. So that's an example of how you use the criteria for your situation. So as long as you can say this is a disability support, it is going to help and improve my life or make my life better, it's a reasonable, cost effective, and it's not funded elsewhere. I've proven that I can't get it elsewhere reasonably. So that's for bikes. Another example that gets used quite a lot, and people come through with these in their claims, is a sensory swing. So normally it's a hammock or a fabric swing with a type of fabric in mind that allows people's sensory needs to self-regulate, provide them a safe, calming environment that isn't too stimulating or stimulates in the right way for them to relax. So a sensory swing, excuse me, designed with individuals who have sensory needs in mind. It's quite obviously a disability support. It's quite reasonable and cost effective. It's quite easy to tell us how it's going to improve your life. And these aren't funded elsewhere. The final example, an Apple Watch. So this is a great example because satisfies all 4 criteria, but also introduced the idea of an ordinary cost and a personal contribution. So an individual requests an Apple Watch Series 6 with GPS. The watch itself was well reasoned as disability support. It helped with fall alerts, blood oxygen, ECGs, and GPS in case they get lost. So the watch itself is very easily meets all of the criteria. The only concern was the extras that were not considered disability related. So we clarified or we asked for clarification about a titanium case and a leather strap to see if they were disability related. They said no. And so, well, your funding can't cover anything that's not disability related, right? That's one of the purchasing guidelines. But what happens when your disability support is an ordinary item like a watch or a TV or something like that? So Inland Revenue are really, and I mean really keen to ensure that disability funding is not used to replace personal income. And that's what it might look like if you're purchasing items like a titanium case or a leather strap using your funding, because, well, it doesn't have a clear disability need, so you're supplementing your income with IF to purchase this item. So then the conversation says, well, considering that a watch is an ordinary item and an ordinary cost, and the average Kiwi or New Zealander buy a watch in their life. So the Ministry of Health and Inland Revenue don't want their funding to replace the household income. So they say, well, if you make a personal contribution to acknowledge that part of this disability support that you're receiving is also an ordinary item and is going to be used in that way, then that is how the rest of the item will be funded. So in this case, the claim goes through and we only reimburse them for the cost of the watch, and then they would then pay out of their own money for the case and the leather strap. So an example that I'm working with a gentleman currently is about his insurance. He's got multiple pieces of mobility equipment that are very expensive. And he said that there's been a spate of hit and runs with disabled people's equipment in the city he lives. So he's gone and got a quote for some insurance. Now, you cannot only insure disability related items on his insurance. He has to include some ordinary household costs to get his house and contents insurance. So we've said to him, yep, insuring your mobility equipment is totally fine within your funding, but since you need to put some unrelated items on your policy, if you make a contribution to match that percentage, then your funding will cover the costs of your disability equipment and their insurance, if that makes sense. So it's always a discussion, and the personal contribution is always meant to work for both parties. So we're not going to prevent you from purchasing an item if the personal contribution might seem to be extremely excessive. We will have that conversation with you individually about how we can ensure that you make the right recognition that it's an ordinary cost, but you're not unduly impacted by the cost of that. And so back to Joe's question. So this happened right at the start, and I'll just repeat it for everybody. Joe said, I've recently started with IF through Manawanui. I would like to buy a wheelchair for those days when walking is too hard. Can I just buy one and submit the claim, or is there a process I need to follow? So there is a purchasing process to follow, especially for items that big. So my comment was to her to just talk with us first, because if you put through the expense claim after you've already paid for it, there is a possibility that it doesn't meet the criteria for your situation, and then you're left needing to cover that cost personally. So it's better to open the dialogue with us before you purchase it, and then we will have a discussion on how we can say yes. That's the terminology we use. We look for ways to say yes so that you can purchase that item. So for example, Joe, if you are just wanting a wheelchair because it helps manage your fatigue levels and you actually aren't able to get funded for equipment, then that's oh, sorry, I'll just go back. That's this one here.
What we can, sorry, Simon.
Yeah.
Maybe, Nicola, when you share the recording on your Facebook page. If you wanted to, you could share our details. Simon and our direct details, questions that crop up after the event. And naturally some people, you know, are not comfortable talking in a group situation, which is totally fine.
Yes, yeah, oh, sorry, Liam.
If you're happy to answer them afterwards, then that would be
of course.
I'm also aware that we've kind of run out of time. It's already after 8
That's why I mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
If you're happy to stay on for a couple more questions, then we could finish up.
That was the end of the presentation. So yeah, apologies, we exhausted most of the time, but it's a bit of a passion, so I get carried away. Yeah, so thank you. I guess just a quick, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate being able to share individualized funding and what Manawanui does with all of you. Please get in touch if you need to, and thank you very much to Rachel, of course, from Moments with Love for putting some weight behind the words we say, and then of course Nicola and Luminita for the opportunity for Liam and I. And yes, happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Simon. I see there's a couple open at the moment. Jane and Nikki, are you on to that?
Yes, yeah. So the question from Jane, I did answer earlier, but I just, so basically, if you have gone through the funding streams, which normally fund physiotherapy, so normally it's the DHB that will fund those sort of therapies, or the Ministry of Health for speech language therapy and things like that. If they've said the wait line is too long or you aren't actually eligible for these services, then your funding can look at covering those sort of costs. And the other opportunity I said is to look for students that are studying in the field that you're interested in and see if they're willing to provide support for you or your family member, and they can use the time while they're supporting you to practice some of the things that they're learning and the sort of therapies that you're looking to get the benefit from. So there are options around it. It's not a flat no, it's just that IF isn't set up specifically for that. And then the other one from Nikki, you've mentioned funding for writing for the disabled, which is brilliant, but RDA is a limited service with a long waiting list. Could the funding be used for private hippotherapy costs? So I'm not quite sure, I'm sorry if what hippotherapy is, but if it's funded, like I said with the other therapies, if it's funded through the Ministry or DHB, those are the avenues first that you need to explore and exhaust, and then you can come back to us with the information that you've tried, and then your IF can come to the party. But if it's a type of therapy that has no public funding whatsoever, your IF can step in.
Hippotherapy is essentially horse-based therapy, from what I can gather, but yeah.
Yes, hippotherapy is horse riding. Oh, thank you. And then in relation to Joe's question, is it possible to pay for a specialist assessment so you purchase the best option of wheelchair? Liam, did you have any expertise on that?
Well, so I'm funded through the Ministry of Health, so any assessments I get for my chair is done through the public sector. In terms of going privately for that, I'd need to have a look at that. I'm not too sure. I haven't personally had a private assessment done, but that's not to say it's not possible. I need to have a look into that.
Yeah, so it's very much the same case as all the other therapies. Is if it's got a public avenue for funding, try that first. If they say you need to wait years, or no, I'm not going to assess you for a wheelchair, you've already got one, or whatever it might be, then come back to us, and it's a different conversation completely.
And I think a lot of the questions and the cases that we and our colleagues deal with on a day-to-day basis are very much case by case. So ask the question and we'll tell you if it's possible or not, and how to make it work, basically.
Yeah. Linda said, what is EGL and how does it differ from IF? So Enabling Good Lives actually is what you'd call not a steering group, but they're an organization that was set up to basically re-envision what disability supports looked like within New Zealand. And then they got the ability to undertake pilots in specific regions with specific groups to change the way disability funding is managed. So Enabling Good Lives is actually its own organization, given its power by the Ministry of Health. And so Enabling Good Lives is there to manage those pilots and drive disability funding forward in whatever shape it looks. So within those EGL pilots, it's slightly different depending on where you are. So in Waikato, the group that they partnered with was Māori people in general. And so the Māori people in the Waikato area could sign up for EGL. And the core difference is that because it stems from the assessment process, how you use your funding. So the assessment process is completely a reversal. With Taikura and other NASCs, if you're not under EGL, the assessment process is talking about what is your impairment, what does it make you struggle with, where are the challenges in your life, and what support can we do to remove those challenges. What EGL does is they say, we don't care about what you struggle with, we want to know what you want to achieve in your life. Like I was talking about, what are your goals? Is it to go flatting once you leave school? Is it to get an education? Is it to get a job, go traveling, whatever it might be? The disabled person and the immediate people around them that matter to them, they come together and create a plan. And they basically, it is the job of the connectors to work backwards from the goals and say, okay, so if you want to achieve these goals, what are the milestones we need to achieve to get there? And what funding and what support organizations can we put around you for you to get there as quickly as possible, or and as quick as possible for you. So it's not just all about what funding is available, it's also what other services are out there, what other funding streams are there. And it's a much more collaborative approach. And actually, I mean, it's just a better way of getting to the point of saying, this is how much support I need, rather than detailing your worst days. It's just a much more strength-based approach, if that makes sense. So essentially what happens is you get this plan and this funding that is tied to your plan, and the purchasing guidelines aren't in place like they are for IF. It's basically, is it in your plan and do you have the funding to achieve it? So as long as you can document that this purchase or this person or the service that you've used relates to your goals and is part of your plan and the funding is there to achieve it, then that's totally fine. So EGL, or the pilots that EGL run, are a version of IF that is just far more flexible. And it's, so in Christchurch, it's school leavers only. Waikato, it's Māori people. And then in the mid-central, which is Mana Whaikaha, if you've heard of them, that is everybody. So that is the prototype, not a pilot, because they've said a prototype implies that it is a future model or a variation of that we are going to use. A pilot implies you can try it, it doesn't work, throw it away. What's happening in Mana Whaikaha in the mid-central, Manawatu, Palmerston North, that is what disability funding will most likely look like in some respect. So if you're looking for an insight into what's coming, I would look there. So EGL and these pilots are a version of IF that's much more free. Individualized funding allows you to pay for the supports that you use to manage your disability and to purchase items as well that may be used as supports. So individualized funding is this flexible, and then the pilots are just the world's your oyster almost. So hopefully that explains it, Linda. It's not always clear.
Thanks, so.
Thank you so much, Simon and Liam and Rachel, for giving us that really great overview tonight and answering all those questions. And thanks also for your offer of answering further questions that come in after tonight.
Thanks for having us.
So thank you so much, and have a really good and relaxing evening, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Cool.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.